Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Bites podcast. Today's episode is about the myths and misunderstandings of modern farming. Today's guest is Michelle Miller. You may know her as the Farm Babe on social media. She is an author, keynote speaker, and online influencer as a full-time advocate for agriculture, giving science a bigger voice in the food and farm space. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So excited to talk with you. I want our listeners to know that this episode is not sponsored. I had the pleasure of meeting you at the IFT First meeting last summer. That's the Institute for Food Technologists. You were speaking with Kevin Folta, who is the well-known professor, scientist, and host of the Talking Biotech podcast. You have a uniquely interesting story about kind of doing a 180 from city girl to farm girl. I would love for you to share that story with our listeners. I think that this is what makes you so relatable, and people can really kind of say, hey, she used to think this, and now that she is on the farm and she knows farmers directly, it has a way of relating to what myths and misunderstandings are out there. So I would love to have you share your story with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And I was in 4-H, so a lot of my friends were farm kids. And even though I wasn't a farmer, my friends were. So I was involved in agriculture in middle school and high school. And then in high school, your teachers and guidance counselors, everybody says, you should work in agriculture. You take those aptitude tests or whatnot. And they were all like, you should be a farmer. You should work as a veterinarian or something. But I actually ended up moving to Los Angeles and I got a degree in fashion and worked for Gucci on Rodeo Drive. So I was about as far removed from the farm life as you could be. And I lived in downtown LA and downtown Chicago for about 12 years, most of my 20s. And then I moved to Florida and I was traveling the world and was bartending on a little white sand beach, a little tiki bar, and living my best life. And I ended up meeting a farmer when I was there. I was his bartender. Sometimes when you pick up the bartender, it actually works. Doug and I dated for about 7 or 8 years. I moved to the farm in Iowa for him. He was a farmer. And together we were farmers. So my tagline was rodeo to the rodeo. But I moved to Iowa and we were raising sheep and cattle. And we grew corn, soybeans, oats, hay, rye, a little bit of everything up there in Northeast Iowa. And I started the Farm Babe as a way to better bridge the gap because I went from believing every myth under the sun about food to learning the real truth direct from farmers. And I realized that I wanted to take a stand and have a platform for the farmer's voice and for the scientist's voice, because so many people just hear the misinformation like I once did. I was an anti-GMO activist. I would only buy organic and non-GMO and gluten-free and whatever, just because I thought the food labels were truthful. Come to find out they're not. That's where it all started. Rodeo to the rodeo.
I love it. It's a great story. So would you say that your focus and your knowledge is more on crops or animal ag or both?
It's both.
Okay, great. That's nice because both are important and they're very different. So it's nice that you have knowledge of both. As you said, you were raising cattle and sheep. And what kind of crops again?
In Iowa, corn and soybean. I know, a shocker,
That's
right?
What I thought. Yes.
Yeah.
I can relate. I was born in Iowa and grew up living in many Midwestern states.
Yeah, same. Yeah, lived in the Midwest for 30 years. Yeah. I like to focus on everything. So I'm traveling the world pretty regularly.
In a different way than you were before.
Yeah, it's anything from agriculture, I'm interested in highlighting it. So
it's great that you had that 4-H foundation as well.
Yeah.
That's neat how it kind of came full circle. You were kind of attracted by the shiny things with the fashion industry, and that sounds really exciting as well. And I bet there's probably some things that you learned in that world that you pull into this world.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can share with us on that?
Yeah, I think that's what's been so interesting about it all is I really connect with like a non-farm audience, like I can understand what it's like to be on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, or both sides of the fence.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like farmers are disconnected from the disconnect. Like they've never gone grocery shopping in downtown LA. Like if you do, your head will like spin to the point where like there's so much misinformation. It's like, what other labels can they fit on this package? It's like they're just using anything they can to try to sell a product, and it's really sad because a lot of those labels are very misleading or bullshit.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that because I know that I had already thought to ask you this question. And then ironically, I saw that you recently did a reel on this. So we're definitely going to talk about food labels. But you make a good point. Oftentimes we think about how the consumer is so removed from the farm. Most people don't have the opportunity to visit a farm directly. But the farmers have some disconnect too, as far as what the average consumer struggles with. You're bridging that gap.
Yeah. Well, and I think farmers, that's like what they know, right? Like they're born and raised on the farm. They're multi-generations. It's like all they know, like they live it, eat it, and breathe it, all day. But it can be easy for them to be really annoyed with the non-farm crowd because they don't really connect with them either.
Sure.
And so they may say, oh, those city people, they don't know anything. They're just snobby and they're whatever. And screw them, But I'm kind of like, no, like, we have to have these conversations. And just because they're misinformed doesn't mean that they're stupid. It might mean sometimes more people need to be less intellectually lazy. It's like, just because somebody says something, don't take it at face value. Like a lot of times when somebody says something that's not true, I'm like, where did you hear that? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Oh, but you should know. Like, unless you heard it, we need to talk to farmers about farming and talk to scientists about science, and not just like, well, somebody somewhere told me something, and then you take it at face value without fact checking. For the love of God, people, fact check. But,
critical thinking.
Yeah.
Which is not easy. You talked about lazy thinking. I mean, I think you and I connected on this before, but I know I've brought it up on the podcast before, is the Thinking Fast and Slow book by Daniel Kahneman. And we have these mental shortcuts because otherwise we couldn't get through the day. But to slow down and be more of a critical thinker does take some skills and some energy.
Yeah.
And to your point about the farmers, I really think those days are gone. And it's not just farmers, but it's like the mainstream medical community. When we hear something that we know is not true, or that is conspiracy theory, or is just misinformation or disinformation, gone are the days where we can just say, well, that's BS, and I'm not going to address that, and I'm just going to keep moving forward. I think we've learned the hard way that we have to continue to bust those myths and put the accurate information out there. And I imagine as a speaker, you do a lot of speaking, that you're talking to both the public, consumer audiences, and also farmer audiences.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, how each audience is different and what your goals are for each audience.
Yeah. So when I get in front of non-farm audiences, those are just my favorite. And I'll do like a myth busting in the grocery aisle section, which just talks about like debunking these food labels one by one, and during the Q&A, every hand goes up. Like people are just like, what about this? What about that? Like, I think people's minds are just blown when they're like, wait, organic uses pesticides? Like there's no such thing as hormones in chicken? Like all meat is antibiotic free? GMOs aren't bad? At what point are we watering down all these food labels to the point where there's not going to be any trust left? And so it's really important that we advocate. And then when I'm in front of farming crowds, I'm encouraging them to advocate. And we all have to think about how everybody votes. Everybody has a role to play in policy. And if our society isn't educated, this is where it's regulating farmers right out of business. Or like we have to fight back and push back against the food companies that aren't being good and true to local US farmers. So it drives me crazy. Like in Florida, I live in Florida, and down here, it's like there'll be strawberries, beautiful fresh strawberries in season, but the grocery stores won't buy local. They'll buy from, product of Guatemala. And it's like, seriously, like we have this very small window that fresh produce is in season, but a lot of the food corporations, they just look at the dollars and they say, well, why would we source from here when we can get it from Guatemala or Mexico for pennies on the dollar and make more profit? And so I think just raising awareness on the importance of keeping farmers farming, keeping USA grown. When I speak to farming crowds, I'm telling them, you guys, we have to speak up. Like, here are some social media tips. Here are some communication tips. Here are ways to get involved. Here's why this is important. And how do we go about doing all that? So it's about educating the consumer and encouraging them to support local, USA grown whenever possible. But then also just bridging that gap, like cultivating connections. How do we do that?
Yeah, I've said this on the podcast before, but when I worked for the Dairy Council for 8 years, that was a while ago, but we really had some major efforts to get farmers to speak up and tell their stories. So can completely relate to the fact that they just want to be out in their fields doing their work.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had to encourage them and explain to them the importance of them getting their voices out there. And I think that was the topic of the talk that you had with Kevin Folta, was like how to get voices out into the social media, credible,
Yes,
evidence-based voices out in the social media. As you know, my listeners are a mix of the general public and health professionals. But any quick tips for those health professionals listening to get their voices out in the social media? It's I don't want to say crowded space, but it's a tricky space. And you're doing such a great job. Would love to hear any tips that you have for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks. I think first and foremost, collaboration is really important to doing something like this because you're going to be posting about me, I'm going to be posting about you, then our followers are going to learn about each other from following, right? So I think that's really important. When it comes to communication, it's really just important to be yourself and think about what type of content would go viral. So when I do hot topics, like doing like a pro GMO post or something like that, like that's the stuff that people might be surprised by, or that's the kind of stuff that goes viral, or you get a lot of chatter in the comment section, which boosts your algorithm. So a vast majority of my followers are on Facebook. And it's called social media. You have to engage with your followers. The more buzz there is in your comments, for every friend that comments on a Facebook post, that post then shows up in their friends' posts and their news feeds. Well, not always, but usually. And so, you're just getting more eyes on the content. And if you can tag and collaborate with other people, a lot of my followers I've built from somebody else sharing it that has a way bigger following than me and vice versa. And I use a lot of social media groups also to connect with others. So I'm in like a science-based women in ag, or my job depends on ag, or, just some other science and skeptics groups, or GMO LOL or whatever, just different ones like that, where you get a mixture of, it's not just a farming audience, but it's a way to connect with people outside of the industry that you can collaborate with.
Those are great tips.
Yeah. And just be true to yourself. People love memes. They love to laugh. They love storytelling. Like, what makes a good movie? It's the hero and the villain. It's the feel good, it's the sad, it's something that evokes an emotion. So if you look at like corporate type social media and the engagement, it's usually very low because it's like very generic, boring, like,
safe.
Yeah, it's just corporate, right? And they have the legal teams and the corporate and the hoops, and that's why their content isn't fun. But like when you have an influencer like myself, it's us. It's our voice. We don't have to answer to the corporate America types. Well, usually we don't have to. The corporate America types or the lawyers, it's just like, hey, I'm going to have some fun with this because this is who I am. And you just have fun. And that's what gets people excited or engaged to want to share your content and get more eyes on the information.
But I must say, you still have to follow FTC guidelines and all of that. And I know that you do that. And I know that it's definitely more engaging to have one single person and their brand and their personality shining through. And I'm kind of surprised to hear that you have the most engagement on Facebook, but I do see that that's where the majority of your followers are. You have a huge following on all kinds of platforms. You're even on TikTok. God bless you. So thank you for being out there. I have kind of like a random side question about things kind of going viral. I don't know if I told you about this, but I might have. So I got my black belt recently.
You did tell me that. Congrats. That's so cool.
Thanks. I thought this would be a great opportunity because I've asked all my friends who have quite a following on Instagram. My karate black belt reel, I consider that it went viral because I have less than 4,000 followers on Instagram, but the reel has 360,000 views, more than 5,000 likes and 5,000 shares. And I will say, I did have to shut the comments down because people were being mean. None of my friends, of course, but random strangers saying mean things about me getting my black belt. What do you think happened there? Like, would you consider that viral based on the number of followers I have? And what did I tap into and how can I recreate that with like something nutrition related?
Yeah, absolutely. So which platform was that you got that many views?
Instagram.
So yeah, I know it's kind of like the unsung wonder of that sometimes how that works. But I don't know. It's just something to do with the algorithm. It's like, I've had it happen to me too. I had a video on TikTok that had 800 or 900,000 views out of the blue too. And I don't know, you can try using different hashtags, but again, people comment and share, and then that may show up on their algorithm. It's really kind of hard to say. And Instagram and TikTok, I feel, are just one of those things that like, you just kind of get lucky. Like, it's weird. Facebook is more algorithm. I think there's a little bit more control in some of the other platforms. But as far as that goes, it sounds like you just had a lot of people commenting, and Instagram just chose to show that to a lot of people, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Just curious. Little side story there. Listeners, if you want to check it, it's only 15-second reel. I think that was part of the magic of it. I used some trending audio, 15-second reel.
Yeah. With Facebook, I know that like people can share them into groups. Like if I ever get attacked by, one time I got attacked by vegan animal rights activists really bad. But it was easy to track because at the bottom of the post, it shows how many shares. And it's like, 694 shares. And a vast majority of those were people just blasting them into vegan groups. And so that's why I had like 9,000 angry vegan comments.
Jeez.
Yeah. And I was gone. I was on a flight that day. So I wasn't even like looking at my social media until I landed and I opened it up and I was like, oh, what just happened here?
Right.
So Facebook is like when you share into those groups, like attack, it's like it's bringing an army onto somebody. But Instagram, you don't really share into groups. So it's different because people can share them on maybe like a story or with friends or something. And maybe somebody shared that and then it just went viral in their community, but kind of hard to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that brings up a really good point. All of us to some extent, but you really deal with a lot of haters on social media. So whether our listeners are the general public or a health professional, I think they would appreciate hearing a little bit about, because you and I had talked about this before. I have a crisis communications background, so I have a sense of strategy there. Case in point, since this reel that I had that went viral was about karate, it was nothing really to do with my business. I did handle it a little differently. If I was getting a lot of hateful comments on something nutrition related, I would have, chosen, okay, is this a comment that is reasonable enough? Questioning maybe, somebody wanting to learn more, I would engage with it a little differently than just some of these personal attacks. But I know that you deal with this a lot. So any advice that you can share or insights about dealing with haters on social media? I know that based on our previous conversation, I really respect how you approach this.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I don't think I get like a lot of haters. I think what we as people just do, though, is that we put too much emphasis and thought into the negativity. So you can have literally a million people say you're amazing and one person tell you suck. And we are wired to put so much of our focus into that one person that sucks. And we can't. And we have to remember that we have no idea who that person is. They could be drunk or on drugs. It could be a fake profile or a troll. It could be somebody in another country. Maybe they don't speak the language. Maybe they're having a bad day and they just took it out on you. So it's more so a reflection of them than it ever is on you. And your followers are always going to be your cheerleaders. And so a lot of times if somebody says something negative in the comments, usually my followers are there to correct or come to my defense before I even get a chance to read it. I don't even read most of my comments anymore. Like once you get to a certain point, you just realize that it's not even worth your time anymore, or you don't have the time to, but you just kind of have to let it roll off your back because it's more of a reflection on them than you. And sometimes I try to not block people. Blocking is like my last resort, but you can maybe delete or hide or, do whatever, ignore, because people are going to come to your defense anyway. So don't even put that much emphasis into it. But I do respond a lot of times too. Like if I look at their profile and they seem like a reasonable person or a rational person, I'll definitely do my best to engage. And I think it's always really important to lead with comments of empathy, being like, I totally understand. Like you have to be on their side. You have to treat everybody as if you would treat them like a friend.
In person, face to face.
Yeah. Or even on social media, I do it too.
We forget sometimes.
Yeah. Right. Like that. Yeah. For sure.
Like I'm dealing with a real person here.
Yeah. They're real people. Like I had a woman the other day in my comments who said, I don't think this broad's ever even been to a chicken farm. And I responded, I said, first off, I'm not a broad. Second of all, I've been to many chicken farms, but it sounds like maybe you haven't. And I completely understand why you feel this way. There's a ton of misinformation, but it's like, I've been touring these farms and writing about these topics for nearly a decade now. Like, how many chicken farms have you been to? And like, that's not what I necessarily said in the comments because I try to be very respectful. But in my mind, this is what I'm thinking, like, no. But I think just responding back and kind of putting them in their place, being like, I'm not abroad. Don't call me that. Like, it's like, that's not okay.
It's not okay.
Like, you're in my house. Would you allow somebody in real life to talk to you like that? No. And I won't allow that in my comments either. Like, if you want to be a jerk, go be a jerk with somebody else. I'm not playing that game.
Right.
And so just being polite and respectful is very important, but I'm not afraid to put somebody in their place either because they probably weren't even expecting me to respond. Be like, oh yeah, I responded and I'm not going to tolerate it.
Right. Very good. So we're talking about myths, misinformation, and disinformation. And for people listening, if you're not familiar with those terms, well, I know you're familiar with myths and misinformation. The disinformation, actually have a related episode. It is episode 243, I believe, about misinformation and disinformation. But just real quick, disinformation is when people knowingly spread information that you know is wrong.
Like, it's more like a planned attack, you know? Like an animal rights campaign that comes out all on the same day across all these major media outlets. That is like a disinformation campaign where it is planned, where they're like, we are going to target brand A on October 13th. And they won't fact check it, but they will. I mean, that's their goal. And then they'll say, donate, donate to our cause and go vegan. And so that's a lot of how fundraising efforts are done, where it's more of like a disinformation campaign that's done on purpose. Whereas, and this is what I understand, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of the way that it's been described to me. And then the misinformation is more so like people are well-intentioned, but misinformed,
Yes.
you know, like they've just kind of heard about it. Like, for example, Joe Cool in, you know, downtown Chicago thinks that GMOs are bad because he heard it somewhere. Whereas the non-GMO project does specific targeted budgeted ads, including influencers, including like a very targeted, specific fear-mongering, fear-based disinformation campaign to try to sell the non-GMO butterfly products.
Yeah, that's interesting. So along those lines, it seems like every single documentary about food and farming is really slanted in a negative light and, in my opinion, sometimes downright conspiracy theory promoting. I get so tired of my kids coming home from school and saying, guess what we watched in health class today?
Oh gosh, the worst.
So what's your take on these shockumentaries?
Yeah.
Are there any out there that you think are credible and balanced? Or just if we see something like that on Netflix, should we just keep scrolling?
Generally speaking, most of them are nonsense. And the ones that are good, there's one called Before the Plate. There's one called Farmland. There's one called, Temple Grandin is wonderful. There's one called No Farms, No Food, Will You Eat the Bugs that I just watched. That was really interesting. But I even have to do a little bit of fact checking on that myself. But most of them, I mean, Food Inc. is the absolute worst. Like,
Fed Up is pretty bad too.
Yeah, Fed Up's really bad. Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. There's Super Size Me 2 is pretty bad. And, you know, there's one called Kiss the Ground. And there was some good information in there, but it's not balanced. Like,
Is that the one that Woody Harrelson narrates?
yeah, like their experts are Giselle Bündchen and Tom Brady. Like, seriously, can you please not talk to celebrities about farming? Like, you know, and the farmers that they have on there are like friends of mine or like acquaintances. And I went, Gabe Brown is one of them. And I said, Gabe, like, Gabe's really good with the regenerative farming movement. I'm all about regenerative as long as we're being honest and kind with the marketing efforts. So I was like, Gabe, like, what the hell? And he's like, Michelle, you should have seen it before they got a hold of me. He's like, it was way worse. He's like, I got him to soften it a lot.
Oh my gosh.
And apparently now they're doing a Kiss the Ground part 2. And Gabe is actually heading that.
Oh, great.
And Gabe is like a regenerative farmer and he's written a bunch of books and he's pushing for the right things, but he's not doing it in a rude way. Like, he does a lot of things right. But if we continue to put down, so like Kiss the Ground in the first few minutes, oh my God, I can't believe I made it through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's very sensational.
Yeah, they compared conventional agriculture to chemical warfare of the Nazis. Oh, and I'm just like, are you freaking kidding me?
Wow.
How are we supposed to get more farmers to sign up for regenerative practices when you lead with insane insults and hyperbole in the first 5 minutes? Everyone's going to shut it off. Most farmers did.
Yeah.
And so a vast majority, it's always a matter of follow the money, And so like Food Inc. was funded by Stonyfield. It was funded by the same corporations that looked to be the hero in the hero villain story. And so a lot of the animal rights activists, like HSUS lobbies 140 million plus a year trying to put animal agriculture out of business, right? So there's hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled into these shockumentaries.
And this is the Humane Society of the United States.
Yes.
But most people think that they're donating to their local Humane Society with the little puppies and the kitties and stuff like that. And this is a completely different organization and agenda.
Correct. Yeah. HSUS is not your local Humane Society. Correct. But they can go off that name because people think that it's good, and it's not. They're one of the worst organizations out there for sure. A lot of them are not very truthful. And that's where I think we're really kind of dropping the ball in agriculture. We've kind of got a PR issue. But if you look at what's going on in agriculture, like I said earlier, there's a lot of disconnect from the disconnect. And when you have a bunch of old, like the demographic of agriculture is generally older white men, and they are not in tune with social media or, Hollywood or anything like that. They're about as far removed from that as you can be. And I've been there. Like, I know what it's like to live in downtown LA and work in the movie industry, because I did. And then you are in this small town and you're like, wow, you guys really don't have any idea what's going on with Hollywood. But they're the voices, right?
Oh, yeah.
So the animal rights groups will pay Ellen DeGeneres and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Giselle and all these celebrities millions of dollars to feed their narrative, kind of like we used to. Remember when dairy was so cool in the 90s because we spent $40 million on the Got Milk campaign just to launch it off the ground?
The milk mustache with the celebrities.
Yes, we had every celebrity, and that was a very expensive celebrity campaign, but it worked in the 90s. Like, I was a kid and I was like, I want to look like Cindy Crawford when I grow up. I need to drink milk. Like, there was no question that milk was the best, most nutritious drink out there. But where is the money being funneled now? Now, Kim Kardashian is the new face of Beyond Meat. Now, the next milk campaign from Silk is the kids of the Got Milk campaign celebrities doing the next milk.
Yeah.
And so it's like, who is feeding who, what money trail behind fear-mongering and disinformation campaign and food? And we've got to get back to talking to farmers and scientists about farming and science.
Yes.
Stop Googling it.
Nothing irritates me more than my favorite actor just starting to spew forth nutrition misinformation, like in an award show.
No.
I'm like, no, please stop.
Yes, it's the worst. Yeah. Like Joaquin Phoenix and Natalie Portman at the, I think it was the Academy Awards, was it?
Yes.
Joaquin Phoenix is like, we need to go meatless.
I'm like, Joaquin, please stop.
Yeah, like we need to go meatless for the planet. Did you ever notice how there's no anti-coffee movement?
Yeah.
The carbon footprint of coffee is insane.
Right. Or they'll say, we're not serving any animal products at this awards dinner. I'm like, but you flew in on your private jet. Please.
Yeah. And you drank your Starbucks this morning that was picked by God knows what sort of hand labor in Colombia, shipped here with this crazy carbon footprint, and diners just dumping it by the potload down the drain. Oh God, food waste drives me crazy.
Oh, food waste. Yes, for sure.
But it's because there's no well-funded anti-coffee lobby. Meat is an easier target because it's an animal, because, it's easier to pull at people's heartstrings. And it's not like there's a lot of money behind the anti-meat movement.
Oh, yes.
It's totally hypocritical.
And disingenuous.
Yeah.
Yeah, hypocritical. So anybody who's interested in learning more about the anti-animal ag agenda, I do have an episode about animal rights compared with animal
welfare.
Thank you. Animal rights versus animal welfare. It's kind of a little different episode than I normally do, but it's a fabulous episode. So I'll put a link to that in my show notes at soundbitesrd.com. Before we talk about marketing and food labels, I do want to just ask you, like, you don't hear about GMOs that much anymore. At least I don't see that percolating up. What are some of the most common myths that you're seeing these days? Are we still hearing about antibiotics, hormones, all of that stuff?
Oh, yes. The anti-GMO movement kind of settled down a little bit, but lately I've definitely seen a spike up in that again. I think that's kind of starting to make another round of disinformation campaigns. But Yeah, hormones is huge. Like people think that chickens are pumped full of hormones and antibiotics. That
Mm-hmm.
myth will not die. There are no hormones in chicken. There are no added hormones or steroids in chicken or pork. And that myth drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And antibiotics, if antibiotics are used, there's that withdrawal period before they can go to market, which means that all meat is antibiotic free. So I think definitely the factory farm type disinformation campaigns really need a lot more help these days for sure.
Mm-hmm. Like, not to hate on another thing, but like that scarecrow
Yeah.
cartoon thing from Chipotle, please.
Chipotle is the absolute worst. I haven't eaten there in probably a decade now.
Same here. I just can't.
No.
And a lot of people don't even know what we're talking about. I do periodically look for that video just to show people, but I'm not going to. I wrote a blog post on it a long time ago, so maybe I'll put the link to that.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually a parody video that was really good that it was by Funny or Die. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I think I saw part of that a long time ago. Yeah.
They did a parody video of that. I might
funny.
put that in the show notes.
Yeah, you should. You should. I would love to watch that again because it's been a while. Funny or Die is great. They also did the video of like the non-GMO label and like, well, what's so great about your milk? Your milk is non-GMO. And like, but I don't think that's a thing. But they don't know that. Let's put it on and rake in the cash.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I interrupted you about the top myths. So anything sort of new, like seed oils, have you seen that?
Yeah, a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about that one.
So I just did an episode on that. So if anybody wants to take a deep dive, because honestly, I was thinking, what are seed oils and why am I seeing all about this in the media and social media? It's basically a seed oil is a vegetable oil that comes from a seed versus the fruit. So like avocado and olive would be from the fruit of the plant. Seed would be something like canola or soybean. And they're polyunsaturated fatty acids, they're omega-6s. Actually, all oils are a combination of unsaturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fats. They're all a blend, so they have differing amounts. But yeah, some people are criticizing seed oils because partly they're associated with ultra-processed foods. Well, okay, then let's, guilt by association or whatever. But then some extreme influencers are saying that they're really, really bad for you. They're the latest evil and they're why everybody has health problems or whatever. And it's
here we go.
Right, here we go. Yeah. So that's some of the things that I've been seeing recently. But like I said, I recently did an episode on that. It is episode 248. So I will put that in the show notes as well and people can get the facts on seed oils. So, okay, let's talk about marketing and food labels. And I don't intend to bash the food industry or manufacturers. I get the concept. I was a supermarket dietitian. I'm just a shopper myself. I understand that everybody's looking for that edge and what's great about my product and why you should buy my product over another product. But it is frustrating to see non-GMO Project or even way back in the day when I was a new baby dietitian, you would see a bottle of vegetable oil that would say no cholesterol. Well, cholesterol is only in animal products. So a vegetable oil is not going to have cholesterol. So even back then we'd say okay, that's true, but it's not really meaningful and it can be very misleading. So this isn't anything really new, but maybe it's kind of just getting out of control. How can we, and I say, how can we? I don't think that it's possible to shift away from this marketing approach to having labels that are purely just information. For example, if you're looking for protein or calcium or fiber or something that's good for your brain health or heart health or whatever, I would love to see a label that just has here's how much of this nutrient is in this product. And then you would know, this is a decent amount of protein for what I'm looking for, or this is a good amount of omega-3s for what I'm looking for, versus this is heart healthy, this is brain healthy, this is anti-inflammatory, blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts on that? Because I don't see this ever happening, but if I could wave a magic wand and do one thing in the foodscape, that would be, and I don't even know if that would work.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. Well, and there's some labels that don't really bother me. I know some people get annoyed by the gluten-free label, for a product that doesn't have gluten.
Like water.
Yeah.
Here's your gluten-free water.
But I think that label is kind of meaningful for people with celiacs. Like there are legitimate medical reasons that people need to know. Is there,
Good point.
they have a dairy allergy. This is dairy free, because you never know. Somebody could pick up a box of cake mix or whatever, and it could say dairy free or whatever. What's a good example of an allergen? Like nuts, right? Still not that many people have it, right? I think, what is it, like 0.4% of people have a peanut allergy or something? I forget.
I don't know the specific, but I did a recent episode on food allergies.
I knew you did. I knew you're the girl to ask.
There you go. Hey, when you're up around 250 episodes, you must have something related to something.
Yeah.
So about 6% of the population has one of the big 8, and then sesame has been added to the big 8. So nuts are within that.
So like labels like that, I feel like are kind of meaningful for people that have allergies. But then when it comes to something like, no added hormones or steroids or antibiotic free, like people just don't know. Like we have to educate. But something like the non-GMO project, like when you are buying into this label, you are essentially giving money to the disinformation train. But GMOs are a good thing. And so what are people even doing? Like people think GMOs are bad, so they're trying to buy non-GMO, but everything we eat is modified. There are like non-GMO herbicide tolerant plants. Everything has been like, nothing's natural. And it tells you nothing about what it was sprayed. And so I think the non-GMO is really the one that drives me the most crazy, because GMOs are good. And so we shouldn't be talking about that. And it doesn't tell you anything about the plant. But like a vast majority of food labels are just nonsense. And at what point are people not going to trust anything we say anymore? Like what else can we fit on there?
Right.
And the more labels that are on a product, the less likely I am to purchase it. And I encourage other people to do the same.
You're talking about like those little icons and...
Yeah, just like whatever. Like non-GMO, I will not purchase anything that says non-GMO, or organic, because organic still sprays pesticides. Organic is not any more pure than anything else that's out there. And so if it's got all these labels on it, I'm just like, okay, this is nonsense. This is misleading. This isn't true. And I refuse to buy a product that is perpetuating fear mongering in food, because we have to educate, and we can't sit there and, it's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them they've been fooled. So like, how about we just don't fool people? Like, how about we just have more of an education approach?
Yeah. Here's the information. Here are the facts.
Yeah. And like, really what's important is the black and white label. How many calories, how much protein, carbs, whatever, like that's relevant. The ingredients, that's important. Everything else is just creating more doubt and fear in the food supply. And we need to do the opposite. We need to celebrate and uplift and understand our food supply, to not put down other products or methodologies just because it doesn't, like, there's a million ways to sell a product without using fear-based marketing or putting down other production methods,
Right. Yeah. And for anybody listening, if you feel like we're kind of glossing or just briefly touching on a variety of hot topics, trust me, I have covered all of these in other episodes. So don't feel like we're just kind of throwing all this out there and leaving you hanging.
Yeah.
I promise I do take a deeper dive on the nuances of some of these topics. But you just brought up something that I just pulled up, this handout that I got at my annual dietitian conference recently. I attended a breakfast by Ketchum Public Relations. And, we hear a lot about different generations, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, and their different preferences and things like that. But they shared some information that I found, frankly, flabbergasting. Is that a word?
I think so. It is now.
It is now. I love making up words. It's my thing, my jam. So being a dietitian, most people become dietitians because they want to help people. And when I do my dietitian communications trainings, I'll say, I know you want to be a dietitian, or you are a dietitian because you want to help people, but I want to know, like, what does that mean to you? Dig a little deeper. What does that look like for you? And for me, what that looked like was not fooling people, helping people who have been taken advantage of by, late night infomercials. We'll leave it at that. The information that I got at this breakfast that I wanted to share. So I have children, one's a millennial, one's a Gen Z. I thought that generation would not be as hung up on food guilt and feeling pressured about what they eat or judged for their food choices. But their insights that they shared said that 61% of Gen Zs have felt pressures on them since childhood about their food. 46% feel pressured or judged by their mom for their food choices. And I'm just fascinated by this information, and I want to take a deeper dive. Maybe I'll have one of the Ketchum dietitians come on the episode and talk about this, because I'm like, is this part of the whole like mom guilt? Moms are seeing these labels. The fear mongering has trickled into their thoughts and behaviors, and they're bringing that home and they're giving this to their children.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a big part of it for sure. Or just kind of what's trending, because when you're a teenager or something, you're trying to fit in. And so if you have that sibling or a peer or somebody that's like, well, I'm going vegan, and like they look up to that person, like, oh, well, I should go vegan. Like, that sounds cool. I think that's probably the biggest part of it. It's just the social part of wanting to fit in.
And the identity. Food is a big part of your identity, for sure.
It is.
Well, I didn't mean to kind of go off on a tangent on that, but I was surprised to hear that generation is still really struggling.
Yeah, I believe it. Especially now with social media, where I almost feel like it'd probably be worse, because everybody's trying to, shove their views down your throat on Instagram or whatever. And it's sometimes the biggest and loudest voices are the ones that are the most inaccurate,
For sure. Absolutely. And that's why I encourage and support and educate dietitians on getting their voices out into the media and social media. As we're wrapping up, we kind of touched on this earlier. Most people will really never have the opportunity to visit a farm in person. There are more virtual opportunities now. Thank you, COVID. That is helpful. People need to have a better understanding of how their food is grown, how animals are raised. But do you have any other suggestions on how people can actually connect with and talk directly with the farmer, maybe locally, if they are interested in doing that?
Yeah, I would search some popular hashtags like hashtag harvest23 or hashtag plant23, hashtag ag Twitter is a good one. Hashtag facts, not fear is a good one for GMOs. And just whatever you're interested in, like if you want to know more about dairy farming, just search hashtag dairy farmers or hashtag dairy farming or whatever it is that you're interested in. Just search that topic.
And you'll find farmers who are in that space.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like hashtag grape harvest, anything that you want to know about, just look for that harvest, that plant, that whatever. And you should be able to find all kinds of people.
Okay. And we'll put some of those hashtags in the show notes too. And if there is a local farm that they want to try to visit, do you suggest that they just reach out?
Yeah, University Extension is also a really great resource. If you go to farmers markets and stuff, oftentimes there'll be like a extension booth or some sort of information. Visiting those farmers is always really great, but I also want to kind of put a little warning on that too, that sometimes, as much as I love small farms, sometimes they're some of the biggest sources of misinformation as well, because they're so used to doing it their way on a small scale. Like, just because you have 5 backyard chickens doesn't mean that we're going to be able to feed the world like that. Farmers are 1% of the population. And so we need big farms. And those big farms, the more you dig in on them, do a really great job. And so I think it's a matter of like knowing your farmer, but knowing that there's a huge difference between being a gardener and a commercial scale farmer, where sometimes the gardeners are the ones that don't really understand what's happening on a big farm either, because they've never been to one, or like they don't know what's going on. So they just assume, but their assumption's wrong because they don't know, because they're judging a farm by its cover instead of actually going in and talking to the experts. So resources are good too, like Beef Checkoff or Chicken Roost or the Pork Board, like Pork Checkoff, stuff like that. Are really great resources as well. But just to make sure you're getting your information direct from the source. If you want to learn about pig farming, talk to a real commercial scale pig farmer. And they're out there. Just hashtag real pig farming. Again, it boils down to people not being intellectually lazy. Like it's going to take a little bit of legwork sometimes. Maybe not.
Well, I think if we point them in the right direction too.
Yeah, exactly. But they're out there and they want to connect. So
yeah. And the difference was, so like, as everybody knows, I worked for the Dairy Council. So that is a checkoff program that is funded by farmers. Yes, there's marketing involved with that as well, but all of that has to go through USDA and is very carefully reviewed so that we're not saying things that aren't completely 100% true and accurate and meaningful. So some of these checkoff programs that you mentioned, and I'll throw a bunch of links in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com. It's the councils, the Chicken Council and the Beef Checkoff and those organizations where the difference between that and a brand is that it is supported directly by farmers. And I love your recommendation for connecting with Extension.
Mm-hmm.
I love Extension. I worked in Extension when I was a graduate student. So I'll put some information in the show notes as well so that people can figure out how to find their local extension through, whatever local universities, your state universities or whatever. They have a wonderful department that will answer anything that you have.
Such great resources.
Any questions you have about food and farming.
Yeah. Any sort of USDA office too, USDA, FSA, they have all sorts of resources out there. People just have to go to the source. It's kind of like, if your car is broken, you go to your mechanic. If your teeth are screwed up, you go to your dentist. It's like we have to go to the source, talk to farmers about farming, and scientists are real people. That's another great hashtag scientists are people. It's a great one.
Okay. So this has been a fun conversation. Thank you so much. If there's any bottom line takeaways that you want to share, and also where people can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So my website is thefarmbabe.com. And I'm Farm Babe on Facebook or at the Farm Babe on any other platform. But yeah, I'm here to give science a bigger voice, bridge the gap between consumers and farmers. So if anybody needs anything, let me know. But thefarmbabe.com is my website that's got articles and videos and more information about my speaking and just everything I do as an advocate. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. We can connect and follow you there and see all the great things you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Thanks, Michelle. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. This podcast does not provide medical advice. It is for informational purposes only. Please see a registered dietitian for individualized advice. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Copyright Soundbites Inc., all rights reserved.